Well, hi folks, welcome to the ICC Men's T20 World Cup 2026 show. New Zealand just didn't beat South Africa yesterday in the first semi final. They absolutely dismantled them. And joining me today to discuss that match, or let's call it a massacre, is Sachin from Big Brain Cricket itself. I mean, what a match that was, right? Sachin, let's start off by getting your first thoughts on the game itself, right? At no point it felt like South Africa was in the game and New Zealand was just running away with honors.
Look, I really thought South Africa would be coming into this semi-final as firm favorites, but cricket keeps showing us why you can't take any team lightly, especially when it comes to a knockout game. So I thought South Africa had a better chance, but kudos to New Zealand, I guess.
Yeah, let's further discuss this match itself because coming into the semi final itself, right? South Africa were unbeaten. They were having this dream run in the T20 World Cup, but New Zealand had sort of scraped their way in through, right? It just feel like, momentum versus pedigree there, even before a ball was bowled. And after just watching the game unfold itself, was it more like a tactical masterclass from New Zealand or just a knockout meltdown from South Africa's perspective?
When you say momentum versus pedigree, I would say South Africa had both. And if you kind of look at um, this whole tournament by itself, right? New Zealand has probably not deserved that spot in the semis, in my opinion, because aside from that one game where that magical rain point did wonders for them, I really didn't see much of anything from New Zealand throughout this whole tournament, right? There's been like flashes of Finn Allen and Tim Seifert here and there. There's been a little bit of everything that's just been enough to be better than maybe Pakistan. So both momentum and pedigree being on the side of South Africa and New Zealand ending up in on the winning side was actually very surprising. But then again, it was determined before a ball was bowled because that's just how the dew is at Eden.
Yeah, because my next point was going to be about the Kolkata surface itself. It felt slower than usual for some reason. But here's where I think Mitchell Santner's decision itself, right, to field first sort of comes into perspective. Do you think it was like a brave or a slightly obvious decision? Because, hey, probably we're better off chasing and just putting a team under pressure right away. And to their credit, they did that, right?
Um, Sorry, you're asking about Santner's decision to field first, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would say it was pretty obvious because again, you look at the pitch report before the match itself, right? Pommy was on the floor. He was saying things like he'd spoken to the groundsman. He was expecting a lot more dew than what we'd seen in the previous game over here. And once the groundsman has stated that there's going to be an excessive amount of dew, I don't think there should be any other way for you to go other than bowl first. Chasing is the right way.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And at what point again, in that first innings, did you sense that, hey, 170 might be like severely under par? There was this entire forecast with the dew as well, right? Because South Africa, the way they batted, right, it felt like, it was like a 160 pitch, or they just didn't, sort of want to go ahead and get that 185. Their batting just, like stuttered, right, at a lot of points.
Yeah. Look, at what point I felt that they were under par? I felt that they were under par from the start of the game itself, right? As soon as those two wickets fell, you knew that getting to maybe 210, 220 was not exactly feasible from that point on. So everything they're going to do from that early collapse is going to be a rebuild. Now, if they had kept some wickets in hand and tried rebuilding and touched 200, there was still a chance. But a 170 by no means is going to be enough. And there's always going to be some spice in the pitch early on when you're playing at Eden Gardens, which means you can't keep throwing those wickets away in an attempt to accelerate that early. The only way to get to a 200 is play the old school IPL way where the first 10 overs you're at like 80 or something, and then the next 10 overs you get like 120 out of it. That's the way to go. Unfortunately, South Africa weren't able to pull it off. They had a lot of stutters. They had, I would say, some poor innings, some innings of very negligible intent. And yeah, if they had, put a little bit more intent when the second half of the innings came around, or maybe like anytime after the eighth over, right? That's when you start seeing some hints of dew around the around the outfield and things like that. So maybe they would have had a chance if they went like that, but unfortunately, I don't want to use the C word, but the C word.
No, I mean, aptly summarized there, and let's probably dissect South Africa's batting in its innings itself, right? They started out really on a promising note. Matt Henry was just getting smashed all around the park. You felt like, oh, this is, the South Africa we know that always ends up having the electric start. But here's where I think, New Zealand really sort of threw a googly, right? Just handing the new ball to an off spinner. This is a World Cup semi final. I mean, Cole McConkey, right, has been that sort of eye opener for a lot of us who don't really follow, New Zealand domestic cricket as much. But then, do you think like that move itself from New Zealand was quite the bold one, and his double strike, right, psychologically just dented South Africa, and there is no way of return?
Look, they've had some really good starts from Markram with ample help from both Rickleton and Decock over this World Cup. When that fails, you need a period of consolidation to ensure that you have enough wickets in hand to fire later. Now, McConkey bowling as an off spinner is something that they have tried in two of the games before this as well. Once against Sri Lanka and one against England. Both times it didn't really work out. One of those games he got hit for I think 13 in his over, and the other one was a very normal over of maybe 7 or 8 runs. So he hasn't inspired a lot of confidence in any fan's eyes. Like anybody looking at this from the outside would think, okay, what's so special in an off spinner bowling in the power play? But given that you're bowling to two left-handers, is obviously going to make that matchup a lot more interesting, um, because you had Rickleton and Decock getting out on consecutive deliveries, right? If they had just taken a single and given strike to Markram, who is a lot more confident with the way he plays off spin in the power play. We've seen him in the IPL as well. We've seen him in the SA20 as well. If you bowl spin to him in the power play, he is going to take it to the cleaners. And off spin specifically, something that's going to turn into his arc, is going to be easier for him to hit. So, irrespective of how you look at the matchup, it is the right thing to do to take a single and let Markram have the strike. I'm not going to blame Rickleton too much because that was just a brain fade of sorts. And yeah, it was a brain fade, and sometimes that just happens. But Decock, on the other hand, should have given some strike to Markram. Now, the first ball of the over was faced by Markram, and he did take a single. Decock should have replicated the same, because as we saw when Brevis came in, he did hit McConkey for a four. So maybe the right-hander had a better chance on this surface.
And I think it's also fair to say, right, that losing Quinton de Kock and Ryan Rickleton in the same over, it did derail South Africa's tempo. We did have, comments pointing that Ryan Rickleton's dismissal itself was a brain fade. You two pointed that out. And Vishal going on to add that for someone who's extremely good with on the off stump itself, Rickleton was just not focused, to be very honest. Again, Sachit, do you agree with this sentiment, and how Rickleton's dismissal again was a massive nail in the coffin for them?
It was because in every single game up until this point, they've had one of the three get off to some sort of a start, except for that India game, probably, right? Everything else you've seen, it's almost always Markram, but there's also been Rickleton and Decock putting in a decent amount of contribution in both those, like from both their sides. Rickleton was not focused. I agree with Vishal. It is rare to see him miss out on width, but that's just how it is, right? A semi-final, you're walking in with a lot of pressure, Eden Gardens, big crowd. Um, there's not exactly any specific support towards either side, but just a large crowd and that pressure by itself is going to be very overwhelming for any batsman coming in, experienced or inexperienced. And this being Crickleton's first World Cup semi, so it goes without saying that he would be under pressure. And yeah, it's just an unfortunate moment that kind of derailed their tempo. But again, they still had enough batting to come, and a period of consolidation would have helped them get to a better total than a 170, I would say.
And again, just talking about that whole consolidation aspect itself, here's where probably Aiden Markram would have really, aided South Africa and their prospects of making a comeback. But he played a very indifferent knock, right? An 18 of 20. Again, right? This is just the kind of innings you can't afford in a knockout. And what did you make of that stay at the crease itself, right? Felt like he was under a lot of pressure, partners were changing constantly, and he was, right, under the pump throughout.
Look, partners changing constantly is not exactly the right way to put it, because in two consecutive balls they were gone and Brevis was there for quite some time. Now, that 18 of 20 was probably exactly the kind of innings you would need in a tough period, because when wickets are falling, you need someone to stick there and soak in some pressure, because he is the captain, he is the most experienced player in the side, and he should step up in a situation like this, and he's been playing well, he's the man in form. There's enough things you could put in favor of Markram coming into this game, which point at the fact that he should have converted. But that failure to convert this 18 of 20 into maybe a 50 of 35 is what made it difficult for South Africa. Because now suddenly, at Markham's dismissal, you're what, 55, 56 for 3, 8 overs into the innings, and suddenly your whole team is playing catch up. And every single batter coming in from that point on is going to be trying to build an innings. They can't exactly get going from ball one, because in the back of their head it's going to be like, okay, I could try hitting this guy for a six, but if I get out, what happens next? So Markram not having his start converted into something big obviously was one of the most important factors in South Africa's batting collapse.
Yeah, 100%. And I think in our live chat as well, Vishal going on to point out that Markram unfortunately has been at the receiving end of just not getting support from other left-handers. And that came down to, Brevis and Miller picking up scraps. This has happened in the group stage as well. So it's a pattern, that we have been observing for a while. But again, talking about another key player in that South African lineup who didn't have the best of the days was David Miller himself, right? Vishal very cheekily pointing out that Miller and long off seem to be a story that just comes back to, haunt South Africa in a T20 World Cup in a knockout game itself. What did you make of David Miller's dismissal yesterday, right? He fell to Rachin Ravindra and couldn't really accelerate, right? Like 6 of 6, again, not very indicative of the kind of presence that David Miller has at the crease, but then just quieted by the likes of Santner and Rachindra, who again just quietly suffocated South Africa, didn't let them sniff out a lot of runs at that point.
100%. I would say Miller is probably the one man that I've been waiting to see for all these years, just to hold one trophy in his hand, right? Every single time he shows up, he plays a semi final, they mess up that semi final, he turns out to be that lone warrior in that semi final, and South Africa end up on the losing side. The exception to that would probably be the 2024 World Cup, where he showed up in the final also for them. And once again, South Africa ended up on the losing side. So this time, I feel like he is excused to have one bad knockout game amongst all these knockout games that he's had over the past decade. But the shot that he played at the time that he played it was probably not the best one, because slightly loopy delivery. You don't want to just wildly swing at that ball when it's tossed up a little slower to you. And yeah, caught at long off. I can't say much more about that, can I?
Yeah, I think it was again just one of those forgettable days for David Miller. When you continue looking at that South African batting card itself, right? Tristan Stubbs at the other end holding, just being able to put in that 29 of 24. Then you had, I think even Devol Brevis, right? 34 of 27. But again, none of these knocks really amounted to anything. And that's why we can probably take a moment to talk about Marco Jansen, right? I don't know what this man is made of at this point. He's just doing everything, right? With the bat and the ball, people finally understanding his relevance as an all-rounder, so to say. Again, such a fair to say it was that lone warriors sort of an innings that ensured, there's like some amount of respectability to that total. The partnership with Tristan Stubbs as well somewhere instilled some faith in those South African fans.
Yeah, I feel like Stubbs should have taken a little bit more responsibility along with Jansen. Jansen kind of played his part with the bat. And I would say that as an all rounder, in the past 2 years by itself, he's already in the same conversations as the likes of Hardik Pandya, Ben Stokes, etc. Right? Marco Jansen is obviously one of those names to automatically enter those conversations now, given his performances across formats, right? He's probably the only player right now who's performing in all three formats. Pandya, not in tests, Ben Stokes, only in tests and not in the other two formats. So Jansen's 55 of 30 was key for them to put up some total which at least looked defendable. I wouldn't say it was defendable because by no means is 170 enough with that amount of dew coming in the Eden Gardens, but 55 of 30, that 170 looked decent enough. Um, I wouldn't say they were 15, 20 runs short. I would say they were probably 40 runs short. Again, this is all in hindsight given the way Finn Allen and Tim Seifert played. Now, if by chance they had gotten to 200, then you never know how Seifert and Finn Allen would have taken on the chase from there because they played with that confidence because they had to chase only 170. So it's hard to say, but yeah, given this whole collapse, I'd say Jansen's innings was beautiful.
Yeah, it was an absolute batting masterclass, I think, in that regard. And just taking a few comments from our live chat as well. I know nobody had pointed out a little earlier that South Africa's law of average just caught up with them at a really bad point in time. Case in point, they had an unbeaten run till now, and it was just really sad that they faced the loss the way they did in a semi-final match itself. I know nobody also pointing out here that I think South Africa was a little casual at the beginning of the game as they thought they had mastered Indian conditions. I wouldn't really call it a case of complacency, but then I don't know, man. Probably, they just got a few things wrong and, they really had to pay the price for it, so to say. Another comment coming in here, which probably Sajid, you can add your thoughts on. ICC should try some more options to negate the due factor, else most games will just depend on the toss. Where do you stand on this? Because most of the times you just see, right, the camera panning towards the ground, like, due being such a big factor, the role that it eventually just ends up playing in the match outcome. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, they do have that spray which they use to try to negate the dew, but I really don't think it's enough. Um, it's hard to come up with something to completely negate it, and there have been tournaments that have been decided completely on dew by itself, right? We saw the 2021 T20 World Cup. The reason Australia have a T20 World Cup trophy in their cabinet is because of toss, dues, tosses. That whole tournament was decided based on who won the toss and the IPL that was played before that, right? So it is very annoying when you're on the receiving end of due, but at this stage, it's still pretty hard to do something about it. Um, Again, yes, I agree that you could start games a little early, but now to them viewership matters, and viewership's not going to be the same even if you start a game 1 hour early. They want to maximize on their 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Box office.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see if ICC takes cognizance of that. But so far, they haven't really addressed it, or fans haven't brought it up as that much of a concern. So let's see, if India ever faces a loss like this, maybe then they'll probably, wake up and smell the coffee and realize, something needs to be done about the due factor itself. But a further postmortem of South Africa's batting itself in our comments, Vishal again goes on to point out that Miller's wicket is more to the credit of the bowling change. They brought in a negative matchup in Rachin, but Santner is clear of the fact that he's someone who bowls, slower through the air. Yeah, I think that was like again a very interesting thing that New Zealand did end up doing, and yeah, it eventually brought them the kind of result that they wanted. So, like kudos to them on that, and great observation there, Vishal.
Yeah.
And another point about Marco Jansen itself, Vishal going on to say that Jansen peaking at the right time, but unfortunate that it was in the losing cause, right? Again, such as like, what have you made of Marco Jansen's World Cup itself, right? At large, it hasn't been probably the most perfect one coming into this match itself. He's blown hot and cold, but a performance like this again would do him a world of like confidence and just heading into the IPL again. Great stuff.
Yeah, look, it's a solid World Cup for him. He has performed very well with both bat and ball. There have been a few instances where he's dipped, but given the kind of role he plays with the bat, I'd say he's been brilliant. With the ball, he could have done better even in yesterday's game, right? It was almost like he compensated for everything he did with the bat. He just leaked the same amount of runs again with the ball. So I think 55 with the bat, 53 with the ball. You're not really giving your team much to do with what you're leaking over there, right? Um, but irrespective of that, I would say that Marco Jansen has done enough to make it to my team of the tournament by the end of the World Cup. It's not 100% yet, but there are a few names that I already have in my mind for when I put down that playing 11 by the end of the tournament. That you guys will find out on Monday. There will be
Yeah,
changes.
that'll be quite an interesting one. Very curious to see who makes the cut for your team of the tournament itself. But just adding on Janssen itself, Vishal goes on to say that Janssen is probably the biggest anomaly as an all format all rounder for South Africa. I mean it in a good way. He might end up bringing in a new gen of players with that skill set itself. Right? Not a lot of teams can boast of having an all round who can generally contribute with the bat and ball. The last you can think of probably like Shane Watson, your Jack Callis, and all of them in that regard. I think the recent times probably like a Hardik Pandya, Cam Green, as much as we hype him up, sort of brings in that skill set. Hasn't really delivered all times, but let's see how that works out.
Yeah,
And
it's not very pure all rounders, right? The definition of a pure all rounder is very different from what we get to see in this day and age of cricket. So, yeah. I
no,
agree.
that is actually a valid observation, right? Because most of the times we just end up seeing, say, a specialized batter or bowler who can, do a little bit with the bat and ball respectively. And we don't get to see pure all-rounders, like you say. I think in the women's game you still have, the likes of probably a Sophie Devine and Elise Perry, on any given day they can probably
Women's
do.
cricket has a huge plethora of all rounders to play with, especially one that caught nothing but fresh air.
Yeah, I hope she has a better run probably in the one-off test itself. But again, I think just a last few set of comments before we move on to New Zealand's batting effort itself.
Yeah.
Anu nobody points out that Tristan Stubbs got a perfect slower ball. He was beaten by pace, but South Africa lost in the power play batting itself, right? Their innings was like pretty much done and dusted. Yeah, I think Sachin had also brought this point up, but unknown nobody says to negate due, they can start games, say like half an hour early, 1 hour early to, see how that ends up working out. But I think some opinions coming in the chat about that is starting games early would mean lesser revenue, lesser audience in person, sole reason to play night games. That's something even the IPL does, right? You have games starting at like 7, 7:30. At one point, I think it was even 8, right? To just have more probably crowds coming in and all of that. But Sachin, let's probably move on to New Zealand's batting effort itself, right? I don't know if there's a lot to talk about because it's just one of those days, right? You're spellbound by seeing a batting effort of that proportion. 84 without loss in the power play. Again, do you think this was the moment that the semi-final was effectively done and dusted, right? Tim Seifert, the kind of aggressive start he had, really ensured, right? Finn Allen could go like all ballistic in like the latter part of the innings itself. So how would you assess that power play?
A lot of games are both won and lost in the power play. This was probably one of the best examples for that. I don't think I've seen a semi-final as one-sided as this in quite a long time. I think maybe something that would come close would be that India versus England in 2022, where Butler and Hales won it without losing a wicket. But 84 without loss in the power play is automatically going to mean that your 170 becomes a piece of cake. You don't see too many teams losing games from there. And yeah, Seifert's aggression did help, but it's not like Finn Allen was doing anything short of what Seifert was doing, right? I think when Seifert was reaching his 50, Finn Allen was 40 of 17 ish, something around that range. And yeah, after that, a 33 ball 100, I just took my eyes off the game for maybe 5 10 minutes, and I looked back and this guy's already on 80. So yeah, it was just a completely different ball game altogether. And I'm sure the KKR fans would be very happy watching this happen in Eden Gardens itself. So yeah.
Yeah, a perfect exhibition in that regard. But again, just talking about Finn Allen's knock itself, a 33 ball 100, right? This is a World Cup semi final. Again, for you, was it like a showcase of a proper, brutal knockout innings that we've probably ever seen? And was it again a case of just South Africa bowling badly? It felt like they were out of ideas, there was just no options left once, Finn Allen was batting the way he did. So, yeah, just talk us through that knock itself and South Africa's bowling, right? Looking a tad clueless, maybe?
They were looking clueless because the conditions really did help them in that situation, right? And they didn't really have a large score on the board to allow them to gamble a little bit more with how they put their field across and what kind of deliveries they bowl. You might have seen a lot more slower deliveries, asking the batter to hit to the boundary and maybe getting caught out at the ropes. But when you're only defending 170 with an absolute river flowing around the outfield, there's really not much you can do. And a 33 ball 100, I promise you, is not easy, irrespective of how challenging or how easy the conditions are. So 100% credit to Finn Allen in that aspect. It is one of the most brutal knockout innings that I've ever seen. The power, the shot selection by itself, and I would say it is the fastest T20I 100 if you don't count all those associate hundreds that have been scored so far. Because I think there was one in 27 balls, and I think that's the fastest one. But Sikandar Raza had a 33 ball 100 before this, but that came against Gambia. Once again, associate, I'm not counting that. Um, so this is just ahead of Rohit Sharma's 35 ball 100 against Sri Lanka. Fastest, in my opinion.
Yeah, probably, just having a understanding of the stats and everything just puts in perspective, right? A 33 ball 100, Finn Allen doing absolute mad stuff there. And again, the context being, doing it at Eden Gardens in front of potential fans you're going to be playing in front of during the IPL just couldn't have been more poetic in that way. But here's another comment that did come in like a little earlier in our conversation about the chokers word itself, right? Chokers for real. How do you bottle something like this, right, during the semi-finals or finals? Now, here's where Shukri Conrad himself, right, the head coach of South Africa, went on to mention that it wasn't even a choke. South Africa was never really in the contest itself, let alone, have a sniff in the game. Do you agree with that sentiment that this knockout is
So,
just, yeah, again, more about New Zealand dominating and South Africa being entirely outplayed?
yeah, so Shukri is saying that it wasn't a joke and they didn't have a sniff at the game. Does that mean that they were made to grovel? You never know. I mean, look, I really didn't think the commentators would also use the C word during the game, but Danny Morrison said it so casually. Like, yeah, one of these two teams, they've been renowned for choking in knockouts, and he was very clearly pointing at South Africa when he said that. At this point, you really do need to ask yourself, right? Even Aiden Markram, as a captain, had never lost any ICC games as captain. If you look at his under 19 stint, every single game he's won it over there. 2024 World Cup, he won everything up until the finals. Once again, he's won everything up until the semi-finals. So the two games that he's lost have been final and semi-final games. So you start asking yourself the question: are South Africa really wired in the brain to not perform during knockout games? So yeah, it's tough to say.
Yeah, it's honestly a tough one to answer in that regard because considering South Africa, their run to the semi-final itself, they were unbeaten. It then becomes a question of it being, that sort of a mental hurdle or a psychological battle that, just ends up coming in between them and was just eventually landing silverware. The fact that they won the WTC itself, right? A lot of fans are just happy that finally, there's some ICC trophy in that cabinet itself. But again, just talking about New Zealand now, they are into another ICC final, right? They've just probably made a habit of this. Again, are we witnessing the most clutch, white ball side of this era, sort of, slowly clawing their way up into people's imaginations? Because a lot of times you just end up taking them for granted. And heading into the final as well, do you sense any weaknesses in this New Zealand unit as they potentially, right, will face the winner of India and England? In all likelihood, people are calling it India itself. So, how do you look at this play out for them?
Um, I wouldn't call them the most clutch white ball side of this era, even though they've done very brilliantly, I'd say, over the past decade, right? They made it to the semis almost every single time. And from that point, whether they made it to the finals or not is a whole other question. They would have had a World Cup at this point if not for Ben Stokes' bat. Um, it's hard to call any team the most clutch white ball side of this era because South Africa have performed to, I'd say, probably their fullest potential over the past couple of years. New Zealand have obviously done well. India have been winning. I'd say they've won two ICC trophies in the past 3 years, 2 years. Uh, it's tough to label one specific team as the most clutch side, but they are up there. They've always been up there. Like if you look at it historically, also New Zealand has always been up and about that semi-final, space. Now, do I see any weaknesses in the unit? Um, yes, because a lot of things that we saw from New Zealand have happened when they played in Sri Lanka. And how they played in Sri Lanka is going to be very different from how they play in India. So they might not um, look in this specific situation. Yesterday's game, they had the due in their favor. I'd say, if not for that, they would have also found it difficult, right? Finn Allen, Tim Seifert, at the end of the day, are just pure sloggers. They are not going to play with any care or it's always going to be carefree, and you don't know where that line is when carefree becomes careless. So it's tough to say how they might do in the final because it's going to be in Ahmedabad. They again, yes, I agree. They might be a little vulnerable to spin, but that's also dependent on the conditions, right? Yesterday, Keshav Maharaj got bashed around, and look, Ahmedabad giving you PTSD is not an issue this time because Jay Shah ensured that South Africa, being the yellow team, is now slightly eliminated and they don't have to play the finals. So if we do play, we don't play against a yellow team. That's all that matters.
And yeah, look at us, speaking so confidently that India is going to make it to that final itself because yeah, not commenting on that because Sudipta going on to say, chill, buddy. New Zealand doesn't have firepower, will lose really, really badly. Again, assuming that, India makes it to that final, which brings me to the probably, billion-dollar question itself, such as what are your expectations, right, from tonight's semi-final itself? For a brief moment, I think off record, we were like, hey, is the match happening tomorrow? Like, there's just so much hype. You open your feed, it's all about, India going on to win. Sam Curran has already given a massive statement, wanting to quieten the stadium of Wankhede and, an entire legion of fans being like, yeah, sure, watchers do that sort of thing. Yeah, just talk us through your expectations, right? Tonight's semi-final, a blockbuster match incoming.
Yeah, look, Sam Curran probably just wanted to pull a Pat Cummins on the press conference. Yeah, it's hard to say how it might pan out, but India are coming in as firm favorites. Now, whether there's going to be some factors with the dew and the toss and things like that, you never know with Wankhede, right? Some days it's easy to chase, some days you see teams collapsing. We will know at the pitch report tonight. We'll know if there's any dew in the forecast or not. And based on that, I feel like the team that wins the toss should have the upper hand automatically. Phil Salt is due for runs. Abhishek Sharma is due for runs. Both of them. The Butler is due for a lot of runs. I think I am personally scared that it might be Butler tonight because of the law of averages. And let's see. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, all in all, I think we are in for a really good match. Such as playing it very safe there, trying to jinx it, anti-jinx it, call it what you may. But in the chat box, I'd actually asked for a few predictions on if India is going to probably go for that win itself. Vishal clearly going on to say if we are chasing, we win. Otherwise, it's going to be quite the task, right? Because I don't know, man. England's batting has been that way that they just bat really deep. If Will Jacks is coming in at what 6-7, then you really have a lot of depth and a lot of reasons for India to be concerned, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will
And
Jacks, if England make it to the final, then Will Jacks is player of the tournament without a shadow of doubt. If they don't, then it'll be a little interesting to see whom they pick because there have been quite a few performers aside from that. But even if they don't make it to the finals, I think Will Jacks has done enough to be player of the tournament. He's carried this team on his back. Um, the reason that they've won games that they should have lost is because of Will Jacks.
honestly, I wish the outcome was not as toss dependent because again, Vishal going on to point here that Bankhede is a happy hunting ground as long as we chase, right? So a lot of it does eventually end up, like coming down to who wins the toss and what do they eventually opt to do, and no one's going to opt to bat first, right, at that Bankhede surface itself because again, chasing is what has really worked for teams like historically too. So they're also going on to mention that England's spin versus India's middle order will decide the result itself. India's middle order has looked really, really sus.
Yeah.
Sorry for the word sus there, but it has just been like all over the place. Yeah. Hopefully, it doesn't come to bite them in this sort of a situation. And even just on the bowling side of things, Vishal going on to say for Varun and Akshar to fire all cylinders, just bowl well, before that dew kicks in will be crucial, right? Yeah, Sachin.
Important question. Is Akshar Patel even going to play? That's something that's been running in my head since yesterday because this whole Washington Sundar debacle is something that I really don't understand. If you have any sort of a debate between who should be playing between Akshar and Washi, I would pick Akshar any day because they both give you the same dimension with the bat. They're both equally as good. But I'd say Akshar has a little bit more of an edge with the ball and while fielding as well. So I find it odd that they even considered going ahead with Washington Sundar. And I would say if Akshar Patel is fit, then he should be playing. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think as clear as day, right? We'd really love to have Akshar Patel in that setup and in the playing 11 itself because Vishal going on to say Washington Sundar in Andre, we get washed out of this tournament, right? Again, not the situation we really want to see.
Absolutely.
And one last, just a last set of comments. Vishal also saying, keep Washi out of the shortest format, keep him for the longer ones, which is something they can really, really reflect on, consider as they go ahead to, right?
Honestly, if you ask me, I don't know how you can fit Washington Sundar anywhere, even in the longer formats. Just that he's looked very bits and pieces. I hate using that word because Sanjay Manjrekar used it to describe Jadeja back in the 2019 World Cup. Uh, but like some days you look at him, you're like, oh wow, what a great all rounder. Other days you look at him and you're like, is this man worthy of holding a bat or holding a ball? Like, there have been a lot of questions raised like this, and I just don't know if he's a starter in the playing 11. Now, by all means, please prove me wrong, please perform, and please win the tournament for us. But I still feel like Akshar better. That's all.
Yeah, a case in point there for India to really understand even fan sentiment and what they sort of feel about this. But again, just continuing the discussion a little more, Vishal going on to ask like thoughts on Akshar being demoted on the contract while he was appointed vice captain of the T20 side. Like, what do you just make of this GG philosophy itself, right? Of not making sense at all.
So there was this old interview by Gautam Gambhir where he was very butthurt about the vice captain being changed from himself to Virat Kohli, right? There was this whole rant that he had gone on saying, I don't understand why the vice captain should be changed. If anything goes wrong, then the captain should be blamed. Right? That was how he spoken in that interview. But ever since he's come in, we've seen that the vice captain has been the one that's been more affected by all these chops and changes when compared to the captain, right? Of course, we saw a lot happening even on the captaincy side of things, but we've seen so many players as vice captain that it's honestly appalling that someone who had a vision like that back then is doing exactly the opposite of what his thoughts were. And forget about being demoted on the contract. He's been removed from the playing 11 itself. So you start asking these questions when he's going and doing the opposite of what he said, right? I agree with the next point as well. The whole Samson scene. He said he's going to back Samson even if you fail for 30 games. I will back you. Proceeds to drop him, proceeds to bring him back, and then proceeds to take credit for using Samson at the right time, this whole peaking at the right time kind of stuff. I don't understand what goes on in his head. At the end of the day, he's still a good T20 coach. He's done enough to prove that. But I don't know, man. I don't like the vibe.
And here's where I'm really probably compelled to ask you this, Sachit. Like, irrespective of what happens in tonight's semi-final, if India goes to the final, they win or lose. Where do you see Gigi, sort of continue in this era of like Indian coaching itself, right? Do you see him being in the scheme of things? Will the team management be sort of prompted to move on from him?
Look, if he's generating results, you really can't change what's going on, right? If they weren't winning trophies, then you could still have a case in point for the lack of performance. I would still say he can stick around for the 2027 World Cup. By all means, please have fun. Because he did show a good amount of promise in the Champions Trophy as well. He won the Champions Trophy as he so stated in the press conference. If he does go ahead and take this team to a T20 World Cup win, then I really don't know if the selectors can chop him or sack him from his role. But I would still say that it's time for a change in coaching staff, at least for the red ball side of things. Someone like VVS coming in as a test coach might do a little bit more for the team than what Gautam Gambhir is doing right now. Because what Gambhir did, even as a test player, doesn't really inspire a lot of confidence in a fan.
Yeah, Sachit, you honestly won't believe. I was just thinking of that. That split, coach philosophy is something that has to be implemented in the Indian cricket circles. I know a lot of people are against that concept, but then I think it's really time, right? Although GJ has done well in the white ball side of things, there's probably a lot of trophies and this T20 World Cup also to boot, but the red ball side of things just doesn't cut like a really good picture. But yeah, guys, before we go on another 10 lakh million tangents and diversions in our conversation, we do conclude our discussion. We started out, by discussing the semi-final that featured New Zealand and South Africa. It also went to tonight's semi-final. I hope it's a blockbuster match, and we definitely have a lot on offer. First things first, thank you so much, Sachit. I know it's a very hectic, busy working day for you, but you still made time for the podcast. To all the folks who joined us again through your work day on our live chat, thank you so much. We will continue doing this. Tomorrow we also have the Australia versus India women's one-off test starting off. So there's a lot of excitement and stuff to look forward to in that regard. But yeah, folks, keep supporting the channel. If you haven't already subscribed, do that as well. But until next time, stay safe, take care. Thank you so much once again.